Hello everyone. What is de-dollarization and why we seem to be much further away from it than what many articles and many videos suggest? Let's talk about it all. Before we enter into this fascinating subject, I recommend you to subscribe to this channel, put a like, and give your comments below. It's truly appreciated. De-dollarization is the process by which a number of countries have basically at least hinted at the idea of creating a separate monetary system that does not rely on the US dollar as its pillar to provide liquidity, but also as a reserve currency. In order to understand the possibility of de-dollarization, we need to understand why the US dollar is the world reserve currency. The US dollar is not the world reserve currency because it has a big army or because the United States is a very large economy. The UK had a world reserve currency, the British pound. The economy of Switzerland, that we all know is quite small, also has a world reserve currency. What creates a world reserve currency? Fundamentally, a number of things. In order to be a world reserve currency, it has to be a reserve of value, a unit of measure, and certainly a means of payment of generalized use. The reason why countries all over the world use the US dollar is because it has freedom of capital, freedom of movement of that capital, independent institutions, a legal system that makes the differences between different economic agents easier to resolve, and a legal and investor security system that provides freedom and at the same time security to those that invest. This is not easy to achieve, and it's certainly not something that can be decided by governments. The reason why countries all over the world prefer to use the US dollar for their exchanges and for their exports and to make any type of commercial transaction is fundamentally because they know that that amount of US dollars used in the transaction will be accepted globally immediately. Furthermore, they know that transactions in US dollars will be free and will be certainly open, that the financial system is completely open, and that at the same time they will have investor and legal security. Those things can be put at risk by the US government. Absolutely, they can. The US dollar is the world reserve currency because despite all the negative things that the Federal Reserve may implement, it is the only central bank in the world that pays attention to the global demand of the currency. And this is very important. Furthermore, the US Federal Reserve may make a few mistakes, or quite a few mistakes in its monetary policy. But if everybody else tries to replicate all the mistakes of the Federal Reserve, increasing massively money supply, introducing the reduction of the purchasing power of the currency as a tool for growth or for at least credit expansion, etc. If other central banks do exactly the same things that the Federal Reserve does on the negative side, destruction of the purchasing power, increase of money supply, massive risks of financial imbalances, etc. But none of the positives, which is freedom of capital, freedom of institutions, independent institutions, and an open financial system, then it is impossible to de-dollarize. If we think about the countries that are getting together or that say that they're getting together to create a currency that will be used among themselves for their transactions, think about it. China has capital controls. Russia has capital controls. India and Brazil have a history of destruction of the purchasing power of the currency via monetary expansion that is much more negative than any of the negatives that we want to attach to the Federal Reserve. More importantly, capital controls and institutions that are directly linked to governments, institutions and legal systems that do not give full confidence to investor security will inevitably make that new currency or the currencies involved constantly more dependent on the US dollar. The Chinese yuan is only used in 4% of the global transactions, whilst the economy is one of the largest in the world. This is not a coincidence. The reality is that it's extremely difficult to de-dollarize the economy if central banks and governments implement all the negatives of the Federal Reserve, none of the positives. They implement all of the negatives of the fiscal policy of the US government, massive deficit, and trying to monetize it through intervention and manipulating, or certainly placing a big level of interference on what the Federal Reserve does. It is true that what we see is a very important concern about the confidence in the United States dollar. Absolutely, there is. And it's logical because the government continues to increase the debt ceiling. Any new government that arrives in the United States seems to be thinking of increasing deficit spending always as a tool, either in growth or in recession periods. All of that is negative for the US dollar. Higher deficit spending means higher supply of US dollars in the economy, and it certainly means lower confidence in the reserve of value of that US dollar. But the problem is that any alternative from the euro to the yuan, to the ruble, to the rupee, to the real, or combinations of all of those are worse in relative terms. Investor and legal security are limited. Certainly, institutions are fully dependent on the government. There are capital controls, etc., etc., etc. De-dollarization may actually happen, but with independent currencies. The problem, as you can see in this video, is not whether there is a good or bad alternative in fiat currencies, because governments inevitably want their demand for their currency to rise, not to preserve its reserve of value status, but to continue to send the negative implications of their fiscal imbalances to a larger proportion of the population. The reason why a government wants to have a world reserve currency or wants to have a higher utilization of the currency is not to defend the reserve of value status of the currency, but to try to pass the inflationist burden to the highest number of people globally. That is why, if there is any opportunity of de-dollarization, it will be with independent currencies. Independent currencies that are not looking for market share to pass the government imbalances. Independent currencies that are not there to basically create perverse incentives for governments to massively increase deficit spending and place the burden of fiscal imbalances to future generations. If there is a de-dollarization, it will certainly be through independent currencies, not with state currencies. Because the reason why other countries want to displace the US dollar is not to have a strong currency, is to have a weak currency that you will be imposed and forced to use. So keep defending freedom, because monetary policy is not improving anytime soon.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.